The first bruise he noticed wasn't on her skin. It was in the way she held the skillet. Too slow, too careful, like it might slip from her hands. Ephraim Shaw had been watching her from the porch, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand, and for a moment he thought she was just tired. The sun wasn't even up yet, and already her apron was damp with sweat, her braid limp from steam rising off the stove. But then she reached to stir the pot, and winced. Just a flicker, a tightening around the mouth, a tremble in the shoulder. But it hit him like thunder. Her name was Lottie Mae, and she'd been cooking for him for 7 months. Before that, Ephraim had eaten whatever didn't rot first: hard biscuits, burnt beans, jerky too tough to chew. He hadn't hired her out of kindness. He hired her because he was starving. She rode in on a wagon with a cracked wheel and a note pinned to her sleeve. Not a letter of reference, just a name scrawled in a child's hand. Lottie can cook real good. Be kind. He never asked who wrote it, and she never offered. But her cornbread was perfect and her stew kept through cold nights. And somewhere between the first pot of morning coffee and the last spoonful of peach preserves, Ephraim got used to hearing her hum softly to herself while she worked. She didn't talk much, didn't complain, but she worked harder than anyone he'd ever hired. Which is why the wince shook him. Because a woman like Lottie Mae didn't show pain unless it was already leaking from the seams. He didn't say anything that first morning. Just stepped back inside the house and sat at the table while she brought him his eggs and bacon, quiet as ever. But when she set the plate down, her sleeve slipped. And that's when he saw it. A deep purple bruise, swollen and angry, curling like a handprint across the soft inside of her upper arm. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. "You fall?" She didn't flinch, didn't lie either, just said something like that, and turned back toward the stove. He let the silence stretch, then asked, "Someone hurt you, Lottie?" She stirred the grits, the spoon dragging slow through the pot. "You don't need trouble, Mr. Shaw. I asked if someone hurt you." Her shoulders rose, held, then fell. "I've been hurt before," she said finally. "But I'm here now." That should have been the end of it. The rules of men like Ephraim were simple. Don't poke where you weren't invited. Don't dig up pain someone worked hard to bury. But something about the bruise sat wrong in his chest. Like an itch beneath the skin. Like thunder before the storm. He watched her that day. How she held her side when she reached for the flour. How she limped when she thought no one was looking. And how she kept humming, like maybe if her lips stayed soft, the rest of her wouldn't hurt so loud. That night, Ephraim saddled his horse and rode into Dry Hollow without a word. He didn't go to the saloon, didn't stop at the sheriff's office. He went to the general store, because if there was one place every story passed through, it was behind that wooden counter, between sacks of grain and whispered gossip. Clara Dean, the storekeeper's wife, was sweeping when he walked in. She didn't smile, just raised an eyebrow. "You buying or listening?" He removed his hat. "Little of both." She stopped sweeping. Leaning on the broom, she stared him down. "She show you the bruises?" Ephraim nodded once. Clara sighed. "I told her to come stay with us. My cousin has a farm out near Abilene, clean folks. Would have taken her in. Why didn't she go?" She said she didn't want to be passed again. Said it was the first time someone let her stay without asking questions. Ephraim looked down at his boots. "She been hurt bad?" Clara's voice softened. "Enough to make her sleep with one boot on. Enough to flinch when the wind blows hard." He clenched his jaw. "Who?" Clara leaned in. "Name's Lester Cade. Used to work a ranch east of the tracks. Got run out for drinking and running his mouth. Last I heard, he's been sniffing around here again." Ephraim's stomach turned. "Lottie say anything?" "Not a word. But she don't have to." That ride back felt longer than the one in. The stars above were sharp and cold, and the wind carried a tension he hadn't felt since the war. Ephraim wasn't a man who sought out trouble. But trouble had a way of showing up when you tried to build something good. And Lottie, she'd been trying to build her own peace. One biscuit, one quiet morning at a time. He wasn't about to let some drunk ruin that. When he returned, the house was dark. He found Lottie asleep on the cot by the kitchen, apron folded neatly over the back of the chair, a lantern still burning low. She didn't stir. Not even when he set a wool blanket over her. Not even when he sat in the chair near the hearth and whispered, "You don't gotta hide no more." He watched the bruise on her arm rise and fall with each breath, and made a promise without saying it out loud. He'd keep the fire lit, he'd keep the door locked, and he'd wait for whatever man thought he still had a claim. Because Ephraim had seen bruises before. He knew what they meant, but more importantly, he knew how to stop them from happening again. The next morning, Ephraim didn't wait for the smell of bacon. He rose before first light and found Lottie already outside. Not cooking, but hanging linens on the line, even though the frost hadn't yet lifted off the fields. She was favoring her right side again, her movements stiff, the wind catching the hem of her skirt like it was trying to remind her how fragile everything still was. He stepped out onto the porch. "You didn't have to do that in the cold." Lottie didn't turn around, just said, "Wasn't sleeping anyhow." Her voice didn't shake, but it didn't stand strong either. "Coffee's on," he offered. Still no turn, but her head tilted slightly. "You're not the kind of man who does small talk, Mr. Shaw, so go on." He swallowed. "I know who hurt you." Now she did turn. Slowly, her hands stopped moving. The clothespin dropped to the dirt. "I didn't ask you to find out." "I know. I didn't ask you to fix it either." "I know that too." She looked away, folded her arms across her middle. "I've had men try to fix me before. Usually ends worse than where I started." "This ain't fixing," he said. "It's protecting what's already worth something." Lottie didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. And that, Ephraim figured, was permission enough. Word came around noon. A trail rider, dusty and wind-chapped, rode up and leaned off his saddle, spitting into the dirt like the message he carried tasted sour. "Lester Cade's in town," he said. "Drunk. Talkin' about what's his." Ephraim didn't ask how the man knew who his was. Didn't need to. Cade had never been the quiet type. Lottie stood by the stable door, arms full of fresh hay, frozen still. "You going into town?" she asked. Ephraim nodded. "I'll come with you." "No. You think I can't face him?" "No," he said gently. "I think you've faced him too much already." Her eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in them, just something sad and tired and ready to stop running. "Don't kill him," she said softly. "I won't," he promised, and then he saddled his horse. Dry Hollow's saloon was half empty when Ephraim walked in, all smoke, spit, and the weight of people pretending not to look. Lester Cade was at the far end of the bar, glass already half gone, mouth already moving faster than it should. "She thinks she's better now," he was muttering. "Like cooking slop for some sad old cowman means she's free." Ephraim stopped 3 feet from him. "You got something to say about Lottie? You can say it to me." Cade turned, slower than he should have. His eyes were red. His lip curled like a dog's. "Well, look at that. The old bull's got horns after all." Ephraim didn't flinch. "You need to understand something. You put a bruise on her again, and I'll put one on you that don't fade." Cade stood, too fast, knocked the stool over. But Ephraim didn't reach for his belt, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, solid as the timber holding up the roof. "I ain't touched her in months," Cade growled. "That's one lie. I came to claim what's mine. That's the second. You think she belongs with you? She belongs to herself." That made Cade laugh. A bitter, rusted sound. "You think a woman like that don't need owning?" Ephraim stepped forward. Close now. Close enough that only one breath separated them. "I think a man who uses the word owning don't know how to keep anything." For a second it looked like Cade might swing. But he didn't. Because there was something in Ephraim's eyes, not rage, not heat. Just resolve. And that scared him more. Cade stepped back. "You're making a mistake." Ephraim nodded once. "I usually do." Then he turned and walked out. Didn't need a fight. Didn't want one. Because walking away, he knew something deeper. Cade was finished. Not by a bullet, but by being ignored. Back at the ranch, Lottie was sitting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee waiting. She didn't ask what happened. Didn't need to. She just handed him the cup and whispered, "He gone." "Not yet," Ephraim said. "But he knows the door's closed." She stared into her coffee for a long moment, then asked, "What if he comes back?" "Then I'll be here." Silence. Then, "What if you're not?" He looked at her. Really looked. Her lip was cracked. Her hands were dry. There was still something in her shoulders that wouldn't quite relax. But her eyes, they held the question. Not if she could trust him, but if she should. So he said the only thing he could. "Then I'll make sure someone else is." Lottie looked away. The wind stirred her braid across her shoulder. And then, so soft he barely heard it, she said, "I don't want someone else. I just want to not be scared in my own skin." Ephraim didn't touch her, didn't reach, just nodded once and said, "Then you stay here, and I'll help you remember how." That night, the fire burned longer than usual, not because it was cold, but because something in both of them had finally started to thaw. She cooked stew. He fixed the hinges on the back door. They sat in silence until long after dark. And Lottie, for the first time since arriving, sang out loud. Not a hum, not a whisper, a full song, clear, steady. And Ephraim sat still and let it echo through the rafters like a prayer neither of them knew they needed. A week passed, the kind of week that almost made you forget bad things had ever happened. Almost. The sky stayed soft, the breeze forgiving. Lottie planted onions in the side garden, her sleeves rolled up without shame. Ephraim watched her from the porch, boots up, fingers twisting the worn edge of his hat brim. But neither of them said it aloud. That Lestercade was still out there. That silence didn't always mean peace. That some men took a quiet week as an invitation to strike louder the next time. On the 8th morning, the barn door creaked in a way it shouldn't have. It was subtle, not broken, not forced, just off. Ephraim heard it before the rooster crowed. He stepped out with the rifle slung low, not raised, not yet. Lottie was still inside, kneading dough. The sun had barely kissed the earth's edge, casting long shadows across the pasture. First, nothing seemed wrong. Then he saw it. One boot print in the dirt near the feed bin. Fresh. Too fresh. And then a small, broken belt buckle, rusted, with the initials LC carved sloppily into the leather. Ephraim didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Cade had been here. He didn't tell Lottie right away. He watched her in the kitchen. The sleeves of her dress dusted in flour, her braid pulled tight against the back of her neck. She looked lighter, not healed, not yet, but beginning to bloom, like spring pushing through cold dirt. So he waited until supper, set the buckle on the table beside her cup of water. Her hands froze. She didn't ask where it came from, didn't need to. "You want me to leave?" she whispered. It wasn't fear in her voice. It was weariness, like a woman who had run out of places to flee. "No," Ephraim said. "I want you to stay, but I want you to know what's coming." She looked up then, right into him. "What is coming?" He didn't answer, because the truth was he didn't know. The next 2 days were different. The ranch didn't feel like home. It felt like a waiting room before a fight. Ephraim double-checked the locks, started sleeping lighter. Lottie kept working, but her hum stopped. Her voice went quiet again. Not the sack over the head kind of silence. Just braced, like a woman who knew the sky could fall again. And this time, she didn't want it to catch her singing. He found Cade on the 3rd night, not because he was hunting him, but because Cade was stupid enough to make noise. One of the milk goats bolted from the fence line after sunset, bleating like it had smelled something wrong. Ephraim came out with a lantern in one hand and his Winchester in the other. That's when he saw the flicker behind the corral. A campfire weak and smoldering, too small for warmth, big enough for cowardice. "Cade," he said, stepping through the brush. The man jumped. He was gaunt now, eyes wilder, lips cracked, a bottle by his feet, another in his coat. "Belle," he said with a smirk. "Heard your little cook still sings like a caged canary." Ephraim didn't speak, just stared. Did she tell you the truth yet? Cade went on. That she liked it sometimes? That she. The rifle but hit him before the sentence finished. Not hard enough to break his jaw. Just enough to end the grin. Cade spit blood into the dirt. You ain't the law, he growled. No, Ephraim said. But I am the last man you'll ever talk to about her again. You going to shoot me? Ephraim looked down at him. The man was shaking. Cold. Drunk. Pathetic. No, he said. And then he stepped back. Because shooting him wouldn't fix anything. Wouldn't unbruise her. Wouldn't take away the years stolen. What Ephraim wanted more than justice was to prove to her that she didn't need a man to bleed for her. She just needed to know he wouldn't run. You come near her again, he said. I'll bury you where even God forgets. And with that, he walked away. The next morning, Lottie asked, Did he suffer? Ephraim stirred his coffee. No. Then why do you look like you did? He didn't answer. Not with words. Just passed her the mug, warm and full, and whispered, Because you deserved more than my silence. She wept then, for the first time, not out of fear, but out of grief for all the men who'd been silent before Ephraim, and maybe even for the one who finally spoke. The fire burned steady that night. Lottie sat on the porch beside Ephraim, her legs curled beneath her, a blanket around her shoulders. And when he reached to cover her hand with his own, just lightly, just enough, she didn't pull away. She leaned her head against his arm. The night wind was soft. The barn creaked, but not from danger. And somewhere in the kitchen, the scent of peach cobbler lingered from supper. I'm still scared, she whispered. So am I, he said. But you stayed. I'll keep staying. And that, more than anything, was the beginning. Not of love, not yet, but of trust. Spring came slowly to the plains as it always did. Soft green threaded itself into the hard brown earth, and Ephraim's ranch started to look like something worth planting again. Calves took their first shaky steps in the pasture. The hens laid more. The days stretched longer, warmer, but Lottie still kept her boots by the door at night. Old habits don't die just because the threat's gone, and bruises fade faster on skin than they do in the mind. One morning, she asked to ride with him, not into town, just around the edge of the property, where the grass ran tall and the fence posts leaned like old soldiers. I want to see where I am, she said simply. Not just the kitchen. Ephraim blinked, then nodded. He saddled 2 horses, gave her the gentler one, the mare called Bluebell, with a mild temperament and slower gait. They rode side by side, no words at first, just hoofbeats in the damp morning. The sky was wide open, that pale, forget-me-not blue that only comes after a clean rain. Lottie's braid trailed behind her. The wind touched her face, and for a while Ephraim saw something he hadn't before. Joy. Not the kind forced by politeness, but the kind that rises on its own. They came to a little rise overlooking the far edge of the creek. The old willows still leaned into the water like they were tired of standing. Lottie dismounted without asking, walked down toward the water, took off her boots and stepped in. Ephraim stayed back, watching. She lifted her skirt to her knees and stood in the cold stream like a girl half her age, eyes closed, sun on her face. Then she looked back at him. You know what this feels like? He shook his head. Freedom, she said. Not escape, not survival. Freedom. And then she sat on the bank and began to hum again. Not like she was hiding pain this time, but like she was feeding something inside her that needed song. They stayed out all day. Didn't /T talk about Cade. Didn't talk about what came next. But something in Ephraim softened that afternoon, watching her pull wildflowers from the banks, brushing dirt from the petals like she was fixing something small and delicate, maybe even inside herself. When they returned to the house, the shadows were long and the wind was picking up. A letter had arrived, left in a burlap sack tied to the post. No name on it, just rough handwriting scrawled in charcoal. You saved her. Don't stop now. Ephraim read it 3 times before handing it to her. Lottie stared at it for a long moment, then folded it in half and slipped it into her apron pocket without a word. That night, She made buttermilk biscuits and honeyed carrots. Ephraim fixed the hinges on the pantry door. Felt like home. No firelight conversation, no big speeches. Just quiet and warmth. As she washed dishes, he stood beside her, drying each one in silence. At one point, their hands touched over the rim of a plate. She didn't pull away. She just looked at him, eyes steady, voice low. I want to stay. His throat tightened. Then stay. I don't mean as a cook. I didn't hire you for that anymore. A beat passed. Then she said it. Soft, but firm. I want a life. He nodded once, like the earth itself had moved beneath his feet. We'll build one. The next Sunday he took her into town. Not for errands, but to walk, arm in arm, past the stairs, past the whispers, through the middle of Dry Hollow like a man who'd chosen who he stood beside, and didn't care who approved. She wore a faded blue shawl and a bonnet she hadn't touched since arriving. He wore the good vest, the one June had made. Clara Dean came out from the general store and smiled like she'd just seen a flower bloom in winter. About time, her eyes said, and Lottie smiled back. Not wide, just enough, because now she could. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. The ranch grew stronger, fuller. Lottie began teaching a few neighbor girls how to make sourdough starter and stitch linen by candlelight. Ephraim built a second chicken coop. Their lives didn't explode into romance. They unfolded. One dinner, one fence post, one sunrise at a time. And each time Lottie stepped outside barefoot, each time she left the door unlocked, it was a kind of victory. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she was done letting fear choose her movements. One evening, after a long day of fence mending, she brought him a plate of apple crisp and sat beside him on the porch. They watched the sky shift from gold to gray. And then she leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, You didn't change me. He tilted his head toward hers. You sure? You didn't change me, she said again. You just waited until I came back. Back from where? From silence. And then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the old sack, the one he thought she'd burned. It was folded into a square, and she pressed it into his hand. You can bury it, she said. He stared at it, then nodded. I will. And at dawn the next morning he did, under the cottonwood tree beside the pasture. Not as a symbol, not as a ritual, but as a quiet truth. She didn't need it anymore. The cottonwood tree stood in soft bloom that spring, its long, finger-like leaves whispering even when the air was still. Ephraim stood over the fresh-turned soil beneath it, where he had buried that folded sack just after sunrise. He hadn't said anything as he dug, hadn't looked around to make sure no one saw. Some things weren't about show. They were about settling, letting the past lie in the ground instead of carrying it through the house like smoke. And as the breeze picked up, lifting little threads of cotton from the tree's high branches, he looked back toward the porch and saw her. Lottie, or just Lottie, not backslash the cook, backslash, not backslash the girl with the bruises, backslash, just Lottie, standing barefoot with a cup of coffee in her hand and sunlight braiding gold into her hair. She didn't speak. She just gave a soft nod, and he knew. She'd seen. And it mattered. By summer, the porch was louder. Not with visitors, not with gossip, but with life. Lottie planted a garden near the east fence. Tomatoes, squash, onions, beans. She used the old apron she first arrived in as a basket now, its tears patched up with her own careful hand. The kitchen changed too. It wasn't just where she worked, it was where she played. She began experimenting. Peach jam with rosemary, cinnamon in the coffee, honey butter folded into biscuits so soft Ephraim nearly proposed after the third bite. You keep cooking like this, he said one evening, and I'll have to marry you out of self-preservation. She smiled without blushing. That sounds like a threat. No, ma'am. Sounds like a plan. They laughed. Not because it was a joke, but because they both knew something was already settled between them. Something deeper than papers or church bells. He'd married her the moment he chose to listen without asking her to explain. And she'd accepted him the moment she sang again, not quietly, but so loud it filled the house. One day, Clara Dean visited, bringing quilts for Lottie's new guest room and a tin of molasses candy. You really mean to keep her? Clara asked Ephraim softly as they stood outside, watching Lottie teach a neighbor girl how to gather eggs without cracking them. She's not mine to keep, he said. Then what is she? He thought for a long second. She's home, he finally said. For me. And maybe for herself, too. Clara smiled at that. And when she left, she whispered to Lottie, "Took long enough." Ephraim never did throw away the buckle. The one with Lester Cade's initials, found near the barn. He nailed it to the inside of the barn door, not out of fear or warning, but as a reminder of how close things had come, of how thin the line is between harm and healing, and of how it was crossed not with a gun, but with a simple choice to stay when it would have been easier to walk. Cade never came back. Word spread that he'd gone further west, took up with a logging crew in Oregon Territory. Good. Let the trees have him. Years passed. The house changed. A second room added. A new porch railing. A few gray hairs in Lottie's braid. She never left her boots by the door again. She left them out in the field, muddy and forgotten as she danced barefoot near the creek. Sometimes Ephraim would catch her humming while folding laundry, or reading in the rocking chair with a pan of biscuits cooling beside her. Once she caught him watching. "You still looking at me like I'm about to break," she said. "No," he said. "I'm watching because you didn't." The neighbor girl, May, came often, sometimes just for bread, sometimes for the peace. One day she asked Lottie, "How'd you learn to be this strong?" Lottie smiled softly. "By being listened to." "By who?" Lottie looked across the field at Ephraim, who was mending the fence in the sun, sweat glinting on his neck, hands steady. And she whispered, "By a man who saw the bruises and chose not to look away." The ranch became something different over the years. Not just land and cattle, but a refuge, a soft place in a hard world. Women passing through Dry Hollow sometimes came to stay for a night. One had a cut lip. One had no shoes. Ephraim never asked. He just pointed to the porch, said, "Sit, you're safe here." And they did. Because sometimes safety doesn't come with locks and rifles. Sometimes it comes with biscuits and silence and a man who doesn't flinch at pain that's not his. Lottie wrote letters, too. Not long ones, but steady. To a cousin back east. To a teacher she once remembered fondly. And one to herself, which she folded and tucked into a book on the shelf. It read, /I am not a bruise. I am not what he did. I am bread rising. I am fire that didn't burn out. / Ephraim died with her hand in his. Nothing grand. Just one evening, quiet as ever. He told her he felt tired. She said, "Rest then." And he did. When they buried him beneath the cottonwood tree, Lottie laid 3 things on his casket. A tin cup, a sliver of peach pit, and a folded apron, patched at the seams. No one asked why. They didn't have to. The story was known. It lived in the porch beams, in the smell of warm bread, in the way no door on that ranch had ever been slammed since. And Lottie, she stayed, taught, baked, grew older without ever growing small. And when someone once asked what happened to the woman who showed up with bruises and silence, she just smiled. That woman never made it past the first winter. And she was right, because the one who lived there now had a new name, a new voice, and nothing left to hide.